Welcome to another episode of Fault Lines. Always a delight to be here. This is a special session that will be squarely focused on the failed coup in the Republic of Benin. I'm Ayodele and always with
Confidence Macari, so to be back here.
confidence. I'm not sure what to call it. Exciting news, flurry of news. But, the reality is there's a failed coup in the Republic of Benin.
AKA the 37 states
Exactly,
of Nigeria.
of Nigeria. Perhaps, Tinubu should start taunting Benin the way Trump taunts Canada to be our 37th state or something like that. But, Nigeria basically led the restoration of democracy in that country. President Patrice...
Deja vu.
President Patrice Fallon has been grateful of the president's intervention, and there's been a lot of insinuations as to why the coup happened, which would look at, would also touch on what the reality on ground is, what the geopolitical implications are, what this means for the Sahel, and of course touch on whether some legal lines were crossed in terms of Nigeria's intervention. But I think it's important to first start with some of the rumors as to why this coup had happened. There was a few amendments, to the constitution that sort of happened in the Republic of Benin over the last couple of months. But one of the things that weren't or wasn't touched was the extension of the term limit of the president. So he was due to be out of office, I think sometime next year, April, even though they added a few number of seats in parliaments and things like that. I mean, it was certain, it was definite that he was going to be leaving office sometime, in April next year. But, people have argued that his strong arm tactics, his repressive tendencies, to forcefully sort of tackle dissenting views and opinions have made him largely unpopular. He's not as bad on the economic front as many of the other African governments that have collapsed in the Sahel. His economic reforms seem to work in certain regards, and you wouldn't put him in the same bracket as those who have failed spectacularly. But I think one of his, perhaps, downsides is the fact that he's been growing increasingly authoritarian in the last couple of months. And like you always say, the enticement of the strong man in Africa seems to catch up with most African leaders. But anyway, we have intervened. We have stopped the coup. Democracy has been restored. And one thing that keeps lingering, since this intervention happened was the argument that Nigeria should have also intervened in Niger Republic. And I thought it was an important place to start this conversation with on my own end, before I let, the mic to you and we explore the other areas. I thought it was important to stress the fundamental difference between intervening in Benin Republic and, of course, intervening in Niger, Republic of Niger. First of all, Niger is more than 10 times the size of Benin Republic. Mm-hmm. It's almost the Afghanistan. It's almost an Afghanistan scenario trying to invade Niger in a way that we could easily, roll over Benin Republic in the event that need arises. And so it's important to realize that they are 10 times the size of Benin. It's mostly desert. And
half the country.
Half the country is a desert. And so the geographical reality of invading their country is a horrific scenario, for your military to plan and contemplate. The second thing, obviously, is that the military strength of Benin Republic, I think, is less than 8,000, if you look at the numbers, less than 8,000. You have more than 30,000 military men in
25,000.
Up to 25,000, right? Okay, 25 to 30,000 in Niger. That's more than 5 times the strength in Benin. But I think even more importantly is the fact that they were critical in the multinational joint task force that were combating the terrorists across the Sahel. And to have confronted them in that manner would have, in two ways. One, exposed us to the advancement of, ISIS or JAS and, more recently now, the GMIN. into all sorts of incursions, because we would have moved and focused most of our military assets, trying to contain the Nigerians and obviously expose ourselves to more attacks from the terrorists. And also, it's important to also realize that at the time, Mali, Burkina Faso were staunchly in support of Niger at the time, that any military action from the Nigerian government also meant confrontation, from the Malians and obviously from Ouagadougou. And if you put all of this together, you can see why it wasn't a sensible decision to just blindly roll your tanks into Niger in a way that you could easily have done in the case of Benin. And this is not to even touch on the fact that you have a lot of fraternity between northern Nigeria and Niger, where an attack on Niger in some parts of the country will be looked like an attack on their kin or their kindred, and it complicates the entire situation. But I thought it was important to sort of start with the fact that, the fact that we succeeded so easily here in Benin seems to make people wonder, why didn't we just roll the tanks when it came to Niger? And I thought it was important to stress the fact that it's an entirely different situation, and we could have pulled ourselves into the kind of, is it a Sierra Leone situation where ECOMOG thought that it was going to be a 1-month operation that ended up lasting between 1990 and 1997. It took us 7 years to deal with an issue that our military thought would have been dealt with in 1 month. The same kind of arrogance that Moscow had when the war with Ukraine began, and certain analysts argue that in 3 weeks they will be turning over Kiev.
Special military operations.
Yeah.
Kiev was supposed to fall in 5 days.
Yeah, exactly. They'll be turning over Kiev in 5 days. And here we are, right? And that seems to be the same thing across the world, where superpowers think that when they invade this particular country, they would have the capital, by the break of dawn. And they end up spending 5, 6, 7 years expending scarce resources, fighting an unnecessary war, because at some point it becomes ego. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, I thought it was important to establish the fact that, the scenarios are completely different. The capabilities of both countries are completely different. And so it wouldn't have made sense to have running blindly, into sort of invading Niger at the time in the way we wanted to. But, I'd hear your thoughts.
Okay, so I first of all have to begin with saying that the circumstances that led to the coup in Benin yesterday was, like you pointed out, we've had the authoritarian drifts by Patrice Talon, who had been in office since 2016 and had come out to definitively state that it's not going to seek another term in a region where we're having a lot of democratic backsliding and everything. Yeah. And even before he got into office, we've had his predecessor also following the same pattern of authoritarian drift. I think I was looking at Freedom House rankings the other day, and I saw Benin was in the whole hybrid democracy, illiberal, partly free ranking. So it was sort of not surprising, or a little bit surprising rather, when I was in church yesterday and then I was seeing updates from Jeune Afrique that some people have started moving mad, So you should also understand that I think the Africa Country Risk Instability Index by SVM Intelligence sort of risk for Benin in 2025 as vulnerable. And that same ranking was applied to Guinea-Bissau. The important thing about those two as an update is that within a sphere of a week, we've had 2 coups in those 2 countries.
Yeah.
Why I'm saying all of this is there's context to how this thing happened, So, but I would differ fundamentally with you in regards to what we saw in Niger versus what we saw in Benin. Yes, Benin is small. Yes, the military is small and everything. There's also the geographic bends, like you've mentioned, that where 50% is deserts, But the thing is, if the Nigerian government had waded into Niger in 2023 with trying to get the military guys out, I'm talking about Chiani now and his goons, we would have succeeded. And the reason we would have succeeded is this. First of all, the coup did not have the backing of the entirety of the military. Yes, Chiani came from an elite special forces kind, which had regular or irregular access and privileges, so much so that their privileges extended across board, that it became more of a right. And Bazoum wanted to cut down on the whole thing. So, in the process of investigating these things, they felt that he was encroaching too much into their freedoms and he had to go. That's why they removed him. That sort of operation, I'm not a military expert, but I'm going to say that if we had taken the initiative, all we needed to do, all the Nigerian government and its allies in ECOWAS needed to do was to capture Niamey. If you had captured Niamey and using air power and the military from
Yeah.
the division in Sokoto, yes, within a few days to a week, we should have the situation under control. But where military operations tends to go awry is, number one, when they meet realities on the ground, the kind of resistance they did not expect. When I was an undergraduate, I studied concepts of limited war. And one of the things that hits me, in strategic studies then was that limited war hardly stays limited. You've already mentioned a lot of examples
Yeah.
where you felt that you would simply go in and then get the whole thing out within a few days, and we all go home singing hallelujah. It just never happens. And the reason why it would have been difficult in Niger was that when the military guys came in, significant portions of the country supported them. That's popular support was there. There was popular
Yeah.
support for the military. I was talking to a BBC journalist the other day, and we were going over scenarios, the counterfactual, if you like, if the Niger thing, the invasion plan by the Tinubu administration, if it would have worked. And I looked at it in a way where we would have had, I don't know what Bazoum did to piss people off, but I do think that his ouster was more of his ethnicity. Mm? So Benin is 53% Hausa. It's the dominant majority. And then you have a lot of other split ethnic groups like
Niger, you meant?
Yes, Niger, sorry. Jema, close to the border with Algeria, if I'm not mistaken. A lot of Tuareg and Sahelian. So Bazoum came from that stock. So it may be that the kind of reforms and the kind of anti-corruption drive he was doing in the military just felt politically unpopular with the houses, and then they felt that he had to go, given that he does not have the kind of backing that you come to expect if his ethnic group was the dominant majority. So I was talking to her, and then I said that one way to have quashed the popular uprising against a possible intervention would have been to organize elections immediately after you get the military guys out. So maybe a timeline is within 2 weeks you should have captured Niamey, declared the no-fly zone, and then you embark on an election. But where I stopped short of endorsing that sort of a plan was down to the fact that Bazoum had only been 2 years into his tenure. He got into office in March 2021, and the coup happened in July 2023. So it wasn't like he was performing badly.
Yeah.
Even in terms of the security. Yes, of course, there were still killings here and there, but compared to when Bazoum was in office and compared to now, it's almost like
worse,
an eightfold increase.
Yeah.
All of the juntas who are taking out Western support, they're faring really badly now.
Yeah.
Casualties, incidents, and everything. I was seeing a statistic from, I think, Akle the other day where it told me that there was a particular country, and I'm trying to think it was Burkina Faso, before the coup, leading up to 2021, they had about 8 GNIM attacks in a month, but now they're averaging 40 every month. You understand? So they have not really been able to take care of the security situation. The same excuse that Cheney and his guys used to beat Bazoum by taking massive power is the same thing that the coupists in Benin are also doing. It's not like as if they have better ideas. So what I'm saying is that if you look at this in my own counterfactual as to how the whole Niger thing would have succeeded was to get Bazoum's buy-in into establishing an election, saying that the guys who took over from him were doing a lot of propaganda around how unpopular he is and everything. But you need to get his buy-in because he was democratically elected. He won the election. So you cannot simply get him out of there with saying that the people do not want you and everything and all of that. But one thing I have come to learn, or one thing I've come to understand in my closing arguments concerning the differences between Niger and Benin is that I think foreign policy-wise, Nigeria and ECOWAS have come to realize that beyond flexing muscles on a small guy like Benin, compared to a much more bigger guy than Niger, the entirety of the democratic backsliding in West Africa has left a lot to be desired.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has become a virus so contagious that people are beginning to think out the same thing. I think our first episode here was a talk about how the Nigerian government foiled the coup in October of 2025. One important piece that many people are not realizing is that, yes, the whole Niger thing was, in fact, an initiative that was led by ECOWAS. It wasn't just Nigeria's idea,
Yeah.
even though you
Yeah.
could make
Even though
the
we're
argument
chairman of ECOWAS at
yeah,
the time.
I mean,
Yeah.
so, but Benin, Nigeria was actively invited.
Mm.
So that is one context that a lot of the critics against our intervention in Benin are missing. The government actively invited the Nigerian government
Yeah.
to say, please
Yeah.
help us, and all of that. So that particular difference is important in
But I also
noticing
wanted
this.
to touch on the fact that, this, what am I to call it now, strategic activism
Yeah.
from President Tinubu, who seems to, wants to fly the kite of a democratic West Africa, trying to intervene in Niger and has done so in Benin Republic. Is there a method to this madness? Because I'm asking myself, what's the crust? What's the objective behind these interventions? I understand that, okay, because except we're saying a government is defined stable based on whether it's democratic or otherwise. Because a military government could actually have a stable country, for instance. A democratic elected government could be very unstable. So my point is, what's the objective, the underlying objective with our interventions in this country? Why are we intervening? Is it simply because we just want democracies to thrive around us, or because we have, national security objectives that are tied to democratically elected presidents that are bordering, our state, for instance? So, and it's important to clarify that, because just like you rightfully said, since the military took over in many of the Sahelian states, insecurity has worsened. In fact, we've also had the short end of the stick, because we've also had increased attacks, after, a little bit of success. So that would also inform how we engage, whether it's a military government or a civilian, government. But we need to be clear from my own vantage point as to why we're intervening in these countries, and if those interventions are tied to specific objectives, that we want to achieve. But I just want to quickly draw your attention to the fact that there were certain arrests that were made yesterday, late yesterday or early in the hours, of today. And they found that the 7 officers who were also arrested were from Burkina Faso. Now, what does that tell you? If you have soldiers, from Burkina Faso who were actively involved, in the toppling of President Patrice, what that means, geopolitically, because obviously it also means that the fact that we've taken this coup out, we are likely to see a lot more hostility from Mali, from Burkina Faso, and perhaps even from Niger, the 3 sisters of the Sahel, for our actions in Benin Republic. So I'm juggling over the top of my head what this means. That first, you had soldiers on ground who were from Burkina Faso. You're likely also going to see a bit of hostility from these 3 countries. And what that translates to in our engagement in the region, particularly, which goes back to my initial question, as it ties to our strategic objective. Is it national security? Is it economic prosperity? What in the world are we pursuing? And are we right on the money in terms of these interventions?
Okay, I'll have to start by saying that I'll take this piece by piece. Number one, there's a reason why people who prefer democracies within their backyard, there's a reason why they prefer it to autocracies or to military dictatorships. For military dictatorships, what you have is, I don't want to use the word unstable, because you've rightly flagged it. It's not automatic that, given that it's a military regime, it's going to be unstable. The word I'm actually looking for is erratic. Yeah. So it's a different thing if you have an investment in a democratic country where it practices the rule of law, as we've
Yeah.
spoken extensively
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
And if there's an issue, you could go through the courts and you could seek redress. It's a different thing if you have an investment in a military autocracy, even no matter how benevolent it might seem, no matter how much of a diarchy is infused into a system of government, you know that it is at the whims and the caprices of the strong man, So this is why many people tend to prefer democracy to autocracy and the likes. Now, as to what Nigeria's strategic objectives would be regarding coups in its region, that factor of stability is very important. That is not to say that we've not worked very well with military dictatorships in the past. As a matter of fact, we went through several military dictatorships.
And we led.
And
In fact, our greatest successes in terms of intervention was when we had military governments in our country.
Exactly. So we've had it. But the thing with what we are seeing now is you first of all have to understand the psychology by which the president of Nigeria operates on. Tinubu came into office after being governor of Lagos. But before he was governor of Lagos, he spent some parts of the 1990s fighting the Abacha government.
Yeah.
It was a dictatorship. So one of the things by which he ruled into office as governor of Lagos State in 1999 was a pro-democracy activist, so the NADECO and the likes. So I think psychologically it still rubs him off wrongly when you have military dictators across his backyard. Yeah. Now, that is number one. Number two, for the broader strategic objectives, you have to look at the circumstances by which Tinubu became president. Tinubu got into office as one of the lowest votes in the Nigerian presidential system ever.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, we've been having declining voter turnout in years, but 2023 was an exception because you all know the whole P2B phenomenon. A lot of people came out to vote. Yet, the votes that got Tinubu in office was significantly lower than what we've had in years of previous turnouts.
Yeah.
Of course, there was voter suppression and everything. This man got 8 million votes in a country where you had up to 93 million registered voters. I'm not a mathematician, but I know that 8 million votes out of 93 is...
Yes, it's about 10%, less than 10%.
Yeah, less than 10%.
Yeah.
So the underlying message to that is this man is deeply unpopular. Unlike Yar'Adua, who in 2007 could come out and say, yes, the election that got me into office was deeply flawed, I'm going to do something about it. You do not have a Yar'Adua in Tinubu. So Tinubu knows that he lacks the domestic legitimacy he will likely needs to rule. He decided to seek it elsewhere. And where was the best place to seek it? The West. So that is why some people who flog Tinubu with the stick of the field Niger intervention thing always say that he has become an American puppet. In fact, this perception is not even helped by the fact that the FBI and the CIA refused to release important files that would have helped the opposition in 2023. So many of the talks around his puppetry or his nature of being an asset to the Americans were a lot more amplified when, given the run-up to the whole Niger invasion plan, we had the Americans publicly backing it. The French, at the very bit, were giving us a gloomy response. I would neither deny nor confirm all of these accusations and all. And if you add this to the fact that ever since he got into office, most of his trips comparatively have been more to the West. His hospital visits have been to France. He's always seen in France than to the East. It is very, very telling. It's very, very telling. And then we now live in a geopolitical environment where you have sharp East-West divides. Now, talking about sharp East-West divides, one of the reasons why the whole Burkinabé involvement in Benin Coup is very troubling is the fact that there has been a lot of geopolitical tensions between Benin and Niger. That's what many Nigerians do not know. So in 2021...
Because they do share a border also.
No, that's not the reason.
No, I was going to highlight the fact that we share a border because people don't know
border,
that Benin shares a border with Niger.
So between 2021 and 2022, the Chinese were looking for to expand their oil imports base, and then they looked at places like Nigeria. Nigeria is unstable, and then they decided to go to Niger. So they had this deal where they had a $400 million worth pipeline that would stretch oil from its production areas in Niger and take it down to Benin. Benin is a coastal state in West Africa,
so
unlike Niger that is landlocked, so they use the ports. in Benin. So the deal was already being signed. It was supposed to come into effect by 2023. All of a sudden, there was a coup in Niger. After the coup, ECOWAS decided to intervene with Nigeria leading. And where shit hit the fan was that for the Nigerians, they felt insulted that Benin, who were supposed to use their ports for exports for this oil to the Chinese mainland, was in support of ECOWAS's intervention. Now, where this became very tenuous was that even after the whole invasion plan was shelved, the Nigerians took the insult, quote unquote, very personally, and they decided to teach Benin a lesson. So Benin has been reaching out ever since then.
Yeah.
Let's reopen these borders. You can resume your exports. But the Nigerians are refusing to play ball. They're refusing to play ball. Now, it got so bad that the Nigerians had to get in touch with the Chinese to explore alternatives because part of the ECOWAS sanctions after the coup was that they were going to close borders, they were going to stifle Niger by their trade. So Niger was exploring other options, trying to use ports in Nigeria or Cameroon, but they abandoned the plan. Now, ever since then, they've decided to diversify their portfolio. So instead of using the ports in Benin, they decided to get to meet Togo, which is why in February this year, the Togolese foreign minister, when he was asked if Togo was going to join the AES, it did not definitively rule it out. He said it's up to the president and the people.
Exactly.
You understand? Now, I am not entirely surprised that we are seeing Burkinabé soldiers on the ground in Benin trying to foil a coup. For the number one reason why I'm not surprised is that before this coup thing happened last week, we had Abdurrahman Chiani, the junta leader in Niger, coming out to say that Benin is actively using French help to destabilize Niger, using terrorists and the likes. Why I was able to ignore that with a grain of salt is that it eerily coincides with the same rhetoric, the same period, and the same antics this same guy did last year, where he accused Nigeria and France of creating the Likurawa terrorist group across Nigerian border with Nigeria to destabilize this country. And then said a lot of lies about France setting up a base in Borno State, like Borno of all states. It was very crazy. So that's number one. So all of these things, the rhetoric from the leader of the junta in Niger, and then Burkinabé guys on the ground in Benin, sort of gives you that picture of a conspiracy from the alliance of Sahelian states that they were involved. Now, apart from that, in my conclusion, number two reason why I'm not surprised that the Burkinabés are involved is down to the fact that beyond Benin, Burkina Faso is having issues with Côte d'Ivoire. They share a border.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, 2 months ago, some Ivorian gendarmes, that's their border guards, were abducted by Burkinabe forces. Now, not the conventional Burkinabe military, but vigilantes, VDP forces. So they do a lot of border incursions into Ivorian territory, and then they kidnap their people, especially the security forces. As a matter of fact, it has gotten so bad that Ouattara and Ibrahim Traoré, they're not on good terms. They're always fighting. So what this thing shows is, number one, the ideological shifts, geopolitical rivalry, and then the element of foreign intervention. ECOWAS and West Africa has now been divided into the pro-Western and the pro-Eastern camps. So if you see people on the ground from Burkina Faso doing this, number one, it points to a conspiracy and it points to an attempt to change the region's fortune to be more in line with what the military guys in this alliance of Sahelian states want.
Yeah.
And I think in my closing argument, I would like to make the argument that what the Burkinabés are doing is going to be a huge problem in West Africa in the next coming days. I've just mentioned that they are actually causing trouble for Ivorian security across the border, and now they're on the ground trying to cause a coup in Benin. Many people are trying to underestimate them because 40 to 50% of their territory has been taken over by armed groups.
Yep.
You understand? But that export of anti-colonialism that we saw a lot in the 1960s with Che Guevara, the communism, Marxism, and everything. I think what this young man in Burkina Faso is doing is trying to reenact the same thing, and it's going to lead to problems within the region in the next
and I
years.
think on that scorecard, I tend to agree with why President Tinubu had to intervene in Benin because
national security.
Because beyond the fact that whether or not you can collaborate with your neighbors in terms of national security, the fact that there's not only a growing contagion, but a growing contagion driven by an ideology,
Yeah.
a sort of a subtle Pan-Africanist ideology from men with khaki that is swindling young people, and young people across the region are catching the cold
Yeah.
on the propaganda.
Yeah.
That can be troubling.
It's a way of them trying to shift the realignment from west to east.
To east, exactly.
Now, I do not have a problem with that. Where I have a problem with it is changing one colonial master
To
for the
another.
other. In my several arguments about ECOWAS's development, I have made the argument that we do not need to rely on east or
the
west.
West, yes.
Anybody wants to come to partner with us in West Africa, by all means. If you're from Turkey, no wahala. I mean, the Turks have very good drones.
Oh, yes.
You know.
Oh, yes.
They help us fight insecurity. If you're from the United Arab Emirates, good. You have the money. You want to invest, fine.
Why not?
If you're from the West, by all means, you already have the history. We are cool with you. If from the East, we also have the history with you. Well, bring all of your resources and help us. We also have something to offer to you. But what I am against is that attitude that our salvation lies east or west. No. Whenever we begin to think like that, what we're simply doing is we're opening up our house and our backyard to a lot of geopolitical competition that we do not need. The world right now is sufficiently divided enough across such ideological lines between China and the US.
I mean, look at what
We don't
Australia
need it
is
right now
having
in
to
our
deal
backyard.
with now between the competition between China and the West.
Yeah.
They're in such a very difficult position
Yes.
where, because of their huge exports to
And so
China.
it's so bad that the speech made by Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Taikachi,
Yes.
where she mentioned that Chinese invasion of Taiwan is going to be a national security threat to
Yeah.
Japan, the Australians could not talk.
That's exactly my point.
This is people who have been fighting the Chinese economically since COVID.
Yeah.
For exports, they
Yes.
could not talk.
Yes.
So for a region as volatile as ours, where this kind of unchecked interferences is going to lead to a problem, it's something we cannot afford. I would say play both sides or play all sides.
Yeah, just be non-allies.
Yes, get as much efforts, get as much help as you can. If the Americans want to help you with technology, get it. If the Emiratis want to help you with investment, get it. If the Turks want to help you with drone, get it. By all means, do not exchange one colonial master for the
another.
other.
I mean, I think that's a critical point. Exchanging one colonial master for another is as absurd, is the height of all absurdities,
Yeah.
right? And because we're pressed for time, I think I'll just we'll just wrap this up, really and truly. I mean, I'm sure events are still unfolding. We're trying to play catch up with a lot of, activities, because we just heard, for instance, that, 7 Burkina babes were on ground. We don't know what is next to unfold in the next couple of days. However, I think that African countries must begin focusing on the basics. If we pursue, for instance, the Free African Trade Agreement that we have on the table, where analysts have experts have argued it will help boost GDP by another 35%, will improve trade, and trade relations across many countries in the region, and boost prosperity and create jobs. I think those are the fundamentals that African governments should be pursuing, and not this silly and, quite frankly, naive debates as to where our prosperity lies, whether east or west, and be more focused on navigating our own destiny, towards a more prosperous future by more collaboration and more intention in investments in our people.
Yeah, I'm going to make this last point by rehashing the conversation we were having before we got on record. This coup that has now happened, and the coup contingent is happening across the belt. I think it's an opportunity for a lot of people to be jubilant, to say, oh, democracy is failing. I mean, let's welcome the military. In fact, if you look at the conversations you see in reaction to the coup in Benin, you will see a lot of talks as to how the democratic experiment has failed. But the thing I want to say is that you can only say a thing has failed when you've practiced it in totality. You cannot do something halfway and then expect the best results. Democracy has not failed in Africa because we've tried it. The concept has simply failed because we have not tried it. See, democracy goes beyond holding elections every 4 years. Because at the very least, that's the basic. giving people a fair representation and a chance for them to choose their leaders. But it goes beyond that, And I'm not saying this to only the military. I'm saying this to the broader political elite across the continent. And I'm going to name drop someone, Olusegun Obasanjo. You understand? And I say this because as recently as a year ago, he was at a symposium where he said the democratic experiment has failed in Africa. But I'm saying this in difference to what he's saying, that it has only failed according to his ideology because he and his friends, being political elites in the continent, have not allowed it to succeed. There's no rule of law. There's no respect for properties. As a matter of fact, there's no reason why in 2025, as Nigerians, we should still be having the Land Use Act that gives all rights of lands to the state government and the federal government.
Yeah.
There's no respect for property rights. So the hard work of hardwiring democratic ideals into the most infinitesimal segment of the population has not been done. So what we've done basically is people over the cracks by having elections every 4 years, and then make sure that we have civilians to civilian.
And of course, the most important evidence that the democratic experiment, hasn't failed in the way you're making the argument is the fact that the alternatives, as we can see in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, governance has worsened.
It has worsened.
Insecurity has become more widespread.
Oh boy.
Their countries are collapsing. And that should be enough evidence to show that substituting or barely substituting, the kaki for the agbada doesn't automatically provide a magic bullet.
The kaki,
what we need to do is investments in institutions, investments in people, and ensure that the rule of law, like you argued, thrives.
And you know the crazy thing? The kaki is losing, the agbada is losing, the people are losing, but guess who is winning? The Islamists. Because whenever everything shit hits the fan in the region, the Islamists are always happy.
Like Farid Zakaria always says that once there is an economic or a governance catastrophe, people don't shift left economically. They shift right conservatively and embrace all sorts of religious and antiquarian cultures. Well, I mean, we've exhausted our time for today. I think it's been interesting talking the coup in Benin, and we'll be following the events as they unfold.
Absolutely.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll do this again in a couple of days.